My wife was killed in a terrorist bombing in Jerusalem. I had just left Israel on a Sunday, and she was killed on a Thursday. She was supposed to come back from this program. It's a graduate studies program. She was supposed to come back on the next Monday morning. She was killed on Thursday. And there were phone calls all day long on the day of the bombing at the Sbarro pizza place. And finally, I was told that my wife was killed and she was identified, and I was to come to Israel immediately. And I was afraid to come because it was a very dangerous situation. There were all types of incidents. I used to read when we were in Israel. I was in Israel for 4 weeks. She was there for 6 weeks for the summer program. And I would read every day in the Jerusalem Post about incidents. Maybe there were 10 incidents, and family members told me there were 25 incidents every day. So it was a very tense situation when I was there, and I was actually afraid to come back to Israel. I told my rabbi that, Rabbi Benjamin Rotner, I asked him if he could come back to Israel with me for the funeral and for the beginning of shivah, and I could sit in his house. I could sit shivah in his house. So he agreed. And on the trip, he told me, he said, Shmuel, he said, there are going to be cameras, there's going to be the media, they're going to be waiting for you in Israel. And they're going to want to know what you have to say. So think about it. So the question is, if you know that all the major networks are waiting for you and they want to hear what you're going to say, what would you tell them? You have an opportunity to change the world. What would you tell them? But keep in mind that if you tell them the wrong thing, it'll never go anywhere. They'll never broadcast it. So I thought about what I wanted to tell them. And I wanted to tell them about truth. And that was what I felt this battle was about. It was a battle for truth. And my wife, her whole existence was about truth. And so that's how it started. And then I realized, I saw that at least for a very brief period of time, there was a lot of interest in what I was doing and what I was saying. And then I came back to America and I sat shivah at my rabbi's house, and there were hundreds and hundreds of people that came to be Menachem Avel. And they all told me stories about my wife, about the impact that she had on children. And I never realized the importance of what she was doing. Here she was teaching little girls. And what I saw during that time was that she was changing their lives. She was showing them the kindness and building in them emunah and picking them up, making them into better people. And it was very special. And for me, I mean, the reason she married me was because we had similar goals in life. And our goals were to make the world a better place. And she did it in her way, teaching girls in school, and I did it in my way. I'd work with kids in my spare time. I was a big brother, a mentor, tutor, and that's why she married me. So after she was killed, I always had this desire to make the world a better place and just to carry on what the two of us were doing. So the question was how? What could I do? What could I do to make the world better? So I had a lot of ideas, and the people where I lived were very supportive. And we had a meeting, we got together, and we were discussing all the ideas that I had. And one woman said, you know how when you're waiting in line in the bank and you let somebody go in front of you? She said, that's what I think is important. So I said, like Kiddush Hashem. I said, yeah. And I asked everybody at the meeting, and they said, yeah. They thought that was a good idea. So I said, how about if we all write stories? If we all email each other stories about kindness that we've done or that we've witnessed, and that we send it out to all of our friends and relatives. How about if we do that? And everybody thought it was a great idea, so we started doing it. And now we have 5,000 people every day that tell stories of kindness. They submit stories from all over the world. And the point of this idea actually was to reach out to Jews who were very far away from Judaism, who had no connection at all. That was the whole point of this project. And sometimes I wonder, since we have so many people in Israel that are involved in this, sending in these stories and reading these stories, sometimes I really wonder, is it touching them at all? And then I look at some of the stories and I see about how people are saying something about Shabbat, but it's about using an ATM machine on Shabbat. And I realize that we are making an impact. I guess some words that I could offer is that I'm actually working on a book about people who overcome challenges in their life. And losing a loved one is certainly one of the greatest challenges that you can experience. But there's a certain commonality in these challenges, whether losing a loved one or losing a limb or having a stroke or, taking care of an elderly relative who's going through a difficult time. There's a certain commonality in the challenges we face in life. And there's certain things that you can do to help you to overcome these challenges. And one thing that's very important are acts of kindness. That doing acts of kindness can help you in many different ways. One way is that it could simply change your thoughts. You could be thinking all the time about memories, unpleasant memories, about your sadness. You could ruminate, you can get involved with that. Or you could think about positive things. You could think about how you're able to help somebody else. And I know some people will say, well, listen, I'm an old person, I'm very sick, how can I help somebody else? So one of my favorite stories a woman sent us, she said, I've had this terrible illness, and there's really not much I can do. I have very little strength, and I have very little money. She said, but there's always something that I can do to help somebody else. She said, when I go to a supermarket, and I see somebody at the cash register, and I give them a smile, and I say a nice word to the person, there's always something that I can do to help somebody else. So, and this is very important for us to overcome the difficulties that we face in life. Like I said, one reason is just merely distraction. Another thing that's very important, even more so, actually I'll say even so with mourning. Sometimes when people have lost a loved one, it's a person that they're dependent on in ways. Maybe it's the person that did all the finances. Maybe it's the person who, took care of the house, took care of the kids, and we feel helpless. So it's very important for the person to feel that they're not helpless, that there's something that they can do that to help. Maybe they can't help themselves. Maybe they can't do what that person used to do for them, but at least they can do something. They're not helpless. So I think that's another important reason to do acts of kindness. Now, specifically about the emails that I started, what's really important to really change these negative feelings that you may have, the non-productive feelings, the sadness that you have, is to do something regularly, to regularly be reminded that Another thing that's also important is that there are good people in the world. So I'll give you an example. Around the time that my wife was killed, it's a very tense situation in Israel, and there were all kinds of tragedies all the time. And like I tell when I speak to groups, I tell them you would hear this noise on the radio. You'd be on the bus and you'd hear beep, 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 and then I'd ask the audience what that meant, and usually they wouldn't know, especially the younger kids. But that noise, that's the noise that they used to make on the radio when the news would come on. So everybody would stop whatever they were doing, they would listen, because they knew something bad probably happened. And they knew that somebody got hurt, and maybe even worse. The question was not, was somebody hurt or worse? The question was, how close a friend was it? It wasn't a question if it was a friend. You knew it was a friend. You knew it was a relative. Just a question of how close a relative or how close a friend. It was a very tense situation. So at this time, this woman sent me an email and she said, I just heard about this horrible thing that happened on the radio, and I felt so horrible and I felt hopeless. And then I got that email and I said, look at that, there are good people in this world. I want to be one of them too. So the email gave her hope. So that's important also. Another thing that's crucial in overcoming the loss of a loved one is a belief in God, strengthening your emunah. And it's interesting, but there's actually a very simple way of doing that I found. And it's like this. I heard from the Rosh Yeshiva, the Yeshiva Gadol of Pesach, Reb Meir Stern. He says over from the Sefer Chinuch, and he actually quotes this all the time to the boys in the yeshiva, that a person can't believe in God unless he has a karas hatov. And particularly, the person needs to have a karas hatov to their parents. If you don't have a karas hatov to your parents, you can't believe in God. So the question is, how could you create a karas hatov? If you could possibly allow a person to have a karas hatov, then possibly you can get them to believe in God, or strengthen their belief in God, strengthen their emunah. So one way of doing that is reminding a person of the good in their life. So the way that I do that is through my emails. When I show people good in other people's lives, it reminds them of the good in their own life. Now, actually, it's very interesting. In the shivah process, one of the things that in the halacha, when you come to be menachem avil, you're not to say a word to the person who's sitting shivah. The person is just supposed to talk and talk. And when they address you, only when they address you are you allowed to talk with them. And from a psychological point of view, this is crucial for a person. The person who's sitting shivah needs to be able to express themselves. They need to be able to talk as much as they need to talk. And they don't need somebody to help them. They need to talk, and just let them talk. Let them say whatever they need to say, and accept them for what they're saying. Don't argue with them. Don't question them. Just let them talk. And that's a very important process in the healing. And it's certainly why that's the halacha. Now, and in dealing with it's not only dealing with loss of a loved one, but it's any type of challenge. Any type of challenge, the need to talk is crucial. Now, why is that? Because what's happened is a person's life has turned upside down. And what used to be no longer exists. And they have to rethink. They have to rethink what their goals in life are sometimes, and how they're going to cope. Because the way they used to cope may not be the way they'll be able to cope in the future. Because the person who they love so much was able to contribute to their life in a certain way, and maybe they can't get that anymore. And they'll have to cope in a different way. So it's so important to allow the person to talk. And what's also important, what I found myself, was all these people telling all these amazing things about my wife. I think if you could tell beautiful stories about the departed, it makes it so much easier for first of all, the person sitting shivah. It makes it easier for them, and then they could just add on to what you've said. So often you go to somebody sitting shivah and they ask, "How did they die?" What kind of question is that? You want the person to think about the positive. That's so important to think about the positive. If you're bringing up the negative, you want them to have nightmares? I mean, think about the positive. And that was so important for me. And I'll tell you, like with my in-laws, my wife was an only child. And for them, what was so important were all the people who played an important role in Shoshana's life. And particularly the children, because she had this major impact on children. And it was so important for them to hear that, to hear all the tremendous things that she accomplished in her life. One of the questions I asked my rabbi on a trip to Israel, I asked him, I said, Rabbi Rutner, I said, did Shoshana accomplish her mission in life? Like everybody has a mission in life. Did she accomplish her mission? Now the reason I asked him this is because he lost his father when he was very young. So I knew that he would have the answer to this question. And he said, yes, Shmuel, she did. She accomplished her mission in life. And I said, well, how do you know? She said, well, she died. That means that she accomplished her mission. So everybody has a mission in life. And sometimes to hear that mission, you may not be aware of what the person accomplished in their life. So if you can tell, if you're able to comfort a person, you could say a beautiful story that you heard about the person. That could really make all the difference. There's another thing that's very interesting. In one of my emails, actually I was just working on it today. Right today, I was working on it this morning. There was an email from a woman, and she said that many years ago, she knew a woman who died at a very young age, and she had many young children. And the children really didn't understand what was going on. They really didn't know their mother. So she put together a scrapbook. And she got all the people who this woman had touched to contribute to the scrapbook. And there's another story actually that we ran recently about also a woman who died young with a young child, and actually had a videographer who donated his time. I guess they were a poor family. He donated his time to video all the hespedim about the woman, and it's so important to save those memories, because those beautiful memories really help us get through the hard times. I think another thing to think about is the research studies show that most people recover from the loss of a loved one. And it's very interesting. There's a researcher, he's a professor of clinical psychology at Columbia University, and he says that he actually did research studies, and he had people who recently lost a spouse, and he put them on video. And he asked them to describe the incidents, asked them to describe their spouse. And the people who were talking about the pain, there were people who talked about the pain, and there were people who were smiling during the interview. There were people that talked about the good points. And the people who smiled during the interview are the ones who recovered very quickly. That's one point. The other point is that in talking with a researcher, actually I was working on a book, and what fascinated me is that people tend to grow from challenging life experiences, and that really fascinated me. And in fact, in Judaism, really it's the challenging life experiences that are what life is about, because our life is about growing. So even though it's very difficult and very painful, this is what makes it grow. Let me tell you a story. When I was going for the Shloshim, I was going to Israel. I had to find a document. And I was looking all over the house for this document, and I couldn't find it. And then, after I had pretty much given up, I looked in my bedroom, I looked on one of the shelves, and there was this beautiful green box. And I looked at the box, and there were beautiful flowers that were painted on the box. And there was a pasuk. There was a pasuk from Tehillim. It said, Even ma'asu habonim, haisa l'rosh pina. That the stone that the builders despised, that stone would be the cornerstone. And I looked at the box and I opened it up, and inside the box were all different types of documents. They were mostly stories and poems that Shoshana had written. And each one was about a different challenge that she had in her life and how she overcame it. And I kept on looking through this, and at the bottom of the box was a document that I was looking for. It was the last challenge that she experienced in her life. It was our kesuvah, our marriage contract. And that was the last challenge that she had in her life, and how she overcame it. And I wondered, like, what was this box all about? Like, so I asked her friend, her closest friend, what it was about. So she said, Shmuel, she said that most people when they have difficulties in their life, it's like a rock in their path. And what do? You can walk around the rock, you can go over it, you could push the rock out of your way, or you could do what Shoshana did. You could say that rock is the foundation. The difficulties in life that we experience, the sorrow that we feel, is the foundation. And that's what builds the Beis HaMikdash. That's what the pasuk means. And that's our personal growth. All the difficulties that we experience in life, that's what make us better people. And I can tell you personally that over the years, this difficult circumstance has made me grown. And recently, I've been reading a lot of books on emunah. And it certainly changed the way I look at life, the way that I daven. And I hope that everybody can use a difficult situation and turn it around and to use it to make themselves better. Please sign up for the emails if you can. Partners in Kindness. You can get our book. It's available for free in most libraries. A Daily Dose of Kindness.